I'm Celeste 28, and I thought lending my parents my car for a family weekend was just being a good daughter. What I discovered when they returned it would shatter everything I believed about family loyalty and expose a web of lies that had been spinning for years. The scratches on my bumper were nothing compared to the evidence I found hidden in my glove compartment, evidence that revealed my parents and golden child sister had been plotting against me in ways I never imagined possible. Before we dive into this wild family betrayal story, I'm curious, where are you watching from today? If you're ready for a tale of family revenge that'll make your jaw drop, smash that like button and hit subscribe because this gets absolutely insane. Trust me, you won't see this twist coming, and the karma that follows chef's kiss, pure justice served ice cold. Growing up in suburban Denver, our family looked picture perfect from the outside. Mom, Dad, me and my younger sister Harmony. Yes, that's actually her name, and trust me, the irony isn't lost on me now. While I was the responsible older daughter who got good grades, worked part-time jobs since I was 16 and saved every penny for college, Harmony was the free spirit who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. The favoritism wasn't subtle. When Harmony wanted to take expensive art classes, money appeared. When she needed a car for her senior year, Dad co-signed for a brand new Honda Civic. Meanwhile, I worked double shifts at the local diner to afford my textbooks and drove a beat-up Toyota Corolla that broke down more often than it ran. Celeste is so independent, Mom would say with pride, as if my independence was a choice rather than a necessity. After college, I landed a decent job at a marketing firm and finally saved enough to buy my dream car, a pristine 2022 Subaru Outback. Midnight blue with cream leather seats, all the latest safety features, and most importantly, it was mine. I'd worked my ass off for 3 years to afford it, and every time I sat behind the wheel, I felt proud of what I'd accomplished entirely on my own. Harmony, meanwhile, had married her college boyfriend Jake right after graduation. They had 2 kids within 3 years. Adorable twin boys named Mason and Tyler. But Jake's startup never took off, and Harmony's freelance graphic design work was sporadic at best. They lived in a cramped apartment, struggled to pay bills, and constantly relied on our parents for financial support. Not that Mom and Dad minded, they were absolutely obsessed with being grandparents and treated those boys like tiny princes. The dynamic was established early. I was the successful independent daughter who had her life together, and Harmony was the struggling young mother who needed constant help and support. Our parents' attention, energy, and resources flowed in one direction, and it wasn't toward me. Family dinners were all about the twins' latest milestones, Harmony's parenting struggles, and how hard Jake was working to make his business succeed. My promotions at work, my new apartment, my achievements. They were acknowledged with polite nods before the conversation inevitably shifted back to their precious grandchildren. I told myself I didn't mind. I was the strong one, the independent one. I didn't need their validation or support because I'd learned to stand on my own 2 feet. But deep down, a small part of me kept hoping that someday they'd see me, really see me, and acknowledge that I was worthy of their pride and attention too. The weekend that changed everything started innocuously enough. It was mid-October, and Mom called on a Thursday evening, while I was making dinner. "Honey, I have a huge favor to ask." She began using that particular tone that meant she was about to ask for something she already expected me to say yes to. "Dad's car is in the shop and mine's having transmission issues. We promised Harmony we'd take the boys to that corn maze and pumpkin patch in Boulder this weekend. It's supposed to be their last weekend open for the season." I stirred my pasta sauce and waited for the actual request, though I already knew what was coming. "We were wondering if we could borrow your car." I know it's a lot to ask, but the boys have been looking forward to this for weeks, and Harmony's been so stressed lately. We thought a fun family outing might help, of course. It was always about what Harmony and the boys needed, never mind that I might have had plans for my car over the weekend. But as usual, I swallowed my irritation and played the role of the accommodating big sister. "Sure, Mom. I don't have any major plans this weekend anyway." It wasn't entirely true. I'd been looking forward to a Saturday morning hike and some solo time in the mountains, but disappointing the golden grandchildren was apparently not an option. "Oh, you're such a lifesaver, Celeste. You know how much this means to Harmony and the boys. We'll take good care of your car, I promise. Dad will pick it up Friday evening and have it back to you Sunday night." The relief in her voice was palpable, and I found myself wondering what would have happened if I'd said no. Would they have found another solution, or would I have been guilted into changing my mind anyway? That Friday evening, Dad arrived at my apartment complex with his usual warm smile and bear hug. He spent a few minutes admiring my car, commenting on how well I took care of it, how proud he was that I'd worked so hard to afford something so nice. For a moment I felt that familiar glow of parental approval that I craved more than I cared to admit. "Drive safely," I said as I handed over the keys. "And make sure the boys are properly buckled in their car seats." "Of course, sweetheart. We'll treat her like she's made of gold." He gave me another hug and climbed into the driver's seat, adjusting the mirrors and seat position with the careful attention of someone borrowing something precious. As I watched my beautiful car disappear down the street, carrying my family off to create more memories that I wouldn't be part of, I felt that familiar pang of loneliness that came with being the outsider in my own family. But I pushed it aside, ordered Thai food and settled in for a quiet weekend at home. Sunday evening arrived with an unseasonably warm October sunset painting my apartment complex in golden hues. I'd spent the day cleaning, catching up on work emails, and trying not to think about the family photos that were probably being taken at the pumpkin patch, photos I wouldn't be and memories I wouldn't share. Around 7 p.m., I heard the familiar sound of my car pulling into the parking lot, and I felt a genuine surge of excitement to be reunited with my baby. Dad knocked on my door with his characteristic cheerful wrap keys jingling in his hand. "One pristine Subaru returned as promised," he announced, though something in his smile seemed a little forced, a little too bright. "We had the most wonderful time, Celeste. The boys absolutely loved the corn maze and Harmony got some beautiful photos. You should see how big those pumpkins were." I accepted the keys and the brief rundown of their weekend activities, noting that Dad seemed unusually eager to head home. "Thanks again for letting us borrow it, sweetheart. You're the best daughter a man could ask for." The compliment felt hollow somehow, like he was overcompensating for something, but I attributed it to my own sensitivity about being left out of family activities. After Dad left, I decided to move my car to my assigned parking spot and grab my gym bag from the trunk. The October air was crisp and perfect, and I was looking forward to taking my car for a drive the next morning before work. As I approached the driver's side, my heart sank. There along the rear bumper was a series of scratches and scuff marks that definitely hadn't been there on Friday. "Shit," I muttered, crouching down to examine the damage. The scratches weren't deep, but they were noticeable. Long scrapes along the plastic bumper that looked like they'd come from backing into something rough, maybe a concrete barrier or wooden post. My pristine car, the first nice thing I'd ever owned, was damaged. My first instinct was anger, quickly followed by disappointment. Not just because of the physical damage, but because Dad hadn't mentioned it. He'd looked me in the eye, praised how well I took care of my car, and said nothing about the fact that something had happened while it was in their care. The responsible thing would have been to tell me immediately and offer to pay for repairs. Instead, I was discovering it myself, which meant they'd hoped I either wouldn't notice or wouldn't say anything. I popped the trunk to get my gym bag, still fuming about the scratches and wondering how I was going to bring this up with my parents. Should I call Dad immediately? Wait until morning? Let it slide and just get the repairs done myself, to avoid family drama? As I reached for my bag, I noticed something odd in the corner of the trunk. a small piece of paper that had been folded several times and appeared to have fallen out of something. Curious, I picked it up and unfolded it. It was a receipt from my auto body shop in Boulder, dated Saturday, the day of their pumpkin patch adventure. The receipt was for rear bumper scratch repair consultation and estimate for a 2022 Subaru Outback with my license plate number clearly written at the top. The estimate was for $847. My blood ran cold. They'd damaged my car, gotten an estimate for repairs, and decided not to tell me about it. But why would they get an estimate if they weren't planning to pay for it? Unless they were planning to handle it without involving me at all. The thought made my stomach churn. How many other things had they hidden from me over the years? But that wasn't even the worst part. As I stood there in the parking lot holding the receipt and trying to process what it meant, I remembered that I'd left some important documents in my glove compartment. Insurance papers, registration, and a few other items I kept there. For safety, I should probably check to make sure everything was still there and that nothing had been damaged when they'd taken the car to the body shop. I slid into the driver's seat and opened the glove compartment. My insurance papers were there, slightly askew but intact. My registration was there too. But there was also something that definitely hadn't been there before. A small notebook with Harmony's handwriting on the cover, Family Financial Planning. My hands trembled as I opened the notebook. The first page made my heart stop. Operation Get Celeste's Inheritance, Early, Phase 1, Complete. Below that, in Harmony's neat handwriting, was a detailed plan that made me feel physically sick. The notebook outlined an elaborate scheme that my parents and sister had been executing for months. They'd been systematically documenting my selfish behaviors, my lack of family commitment, and my inability to prioritize family over material possessions. The goal, as clearly stated on page 3, was to convince our maternal grandmother, who was quite wealthy and had always favored me, that I was irresponsible and undeserving of the substantial inheritance she'd always promised would come to me. Page after page detailed their strategy. They'd been feeding Grandma Rose carefully crafted stories about my supposed selfishness and materialism. They told her I'd refused to help with family emergencies, lies that I was too focused on my career to care about family manipulation of the truth, and that I'd repeatedly shown I valued money and possessions over relationships. Complete fabrication. The most damning part was their documentation of evidence they'd been collecting. Photos of my apartment that they'd taken during visits showing what they described as excessive spending on luxury items, my moderately nice furniture that I'd saved for years to afford. Screenshots of my social media posts about work achievements which they'd characterized as bragging and showing off. Even receipts from dinners I'd paid for during family outings which they'd somehow twisted into evidence of my flaunting wealth while family members struggle. But the real punch to the gut came on page 7, their master plan for the weekend. They deliberately asked to borrow my car with the intention of causing some kind of damage, then documenting my reaction to create evidence of my materialism and selfishness. If I got angry about the scratches, they'd film it or record it somehow, then show Grandma Rose how I cared more about a car than about family happiness. The notebook even included a backup plan. If the damage didn't make me angry enough, they were prepared to accidentally spill something on the leather seats or cause interior damage that would be expensive to repair. The goal was to provoke a reaction they could use against me, then portray me as a heartless sister who valued possessions over family joy. As I sat in my damaged car reading page after page of their betrayal, I felt something inside me fundamentally shift. This wasn't just favoritism or garden variety family dysfunction. This was calculated, deliberate sabotage designed to steal my inheritance and destroy my relationship with the one family member who'd always believed in me. The final pages of the notebook outlined their timeline. Phase 1 was nearly complete. They'd successfully convinced Grandma Rose that I was selfish and materialistic. Phase 2 involved creating a crisis where I would refuse to help Harmony and the kids, which would be the final proof Grandma needed to change her will. Phase 3 was getting Grandma to transfer my inheritance to Harmony, who would obviously be a more responsible and caring beneficiary. I closed the notebook and sat in stunned silence as the full scope of their betrayal sank in. My own parents and sister had been systematically destroying my reputation with my grandmother for months, all so they could steal money that had been promised to me since I was a child. The damaged car was just a small part of a much larger, more sinister plan, but they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd left their evidence where I could find it. The next morning I called in sick to work. Not because I was physically ill, but because I needed time to process what I'd discovered and figure out my next move. I'd barely slept, spending most of the night rereading the notebook and trying to understand how my own family could orchestrate such an elaborate betrayal. But as the initial shock wore off, it was replaced by something much more powerful: cold, calculated fury. I started by calling Grandma Rose. At 83, she was sharp as a tack and had always been my biggest supporter. She'd worked as a teacher for 40 years, saved every penny and invested wisely. Her modest house in Fort Collins was paid off, and she had a substantial nest egg that she'd always told me would help secure my future.
"You're the responsible one, Celeste," she'd always said.
"You understand the value of hard work and planning ahead?" "Grandma, it's Celeste. I was wondering if we could have lunch today. I feel like we haven't talked in a while." My voice was steady, but my heart was pounding. "Oh, sweetheart, I'd love that. Though I have to say I'm a little surprised. Your mother mentioned you've been so busy with work lately that you don't have much time for family." There it was, the first hint that their poison was already working. We agreed to meet at her favorite cafe in Old Town Fort Collins at noon. I spent the morning preparing, knowing this conversation would be crucial. I couldn't just tell Grandma about the notebook without proof, but I also couldn't let their lies continue to poison our relationship. The drive to Fort Collins gave me time to think, and by the time I arrived at the cafe, I had a plan. Grandma Rose was already there, sitting at our usual corner table with a cup of Earl Grey tea and a warm smile that made my heart ache. She looked exactly the same as always: silver hair and a neat bob cardigan sweater, and the kind of genuine warmth that made everyone feel like her favorite person. "There's my successful granddaughter," she said, standing to give me a hug. But I noticed something different in her tone, a subtle distance that hadn't been there before. We ordered lunch and made small talk about my job and her garden, but as we ate, I could feel her studying me, as if she was looking for signs of something. Finally, I decided to test the waters. Mom mentioned that Harmony's been having a tough time lately with the kids and finances. I've been thinking about ways I could help out more. I watched her face carefully as I spoke. Her expression shifted slightly, and she set down her fork. "Well, dear, that's very thoughtful of you. Though your mother did mention that you've been, well, perhaps a bit focused on your own life lately. She said you haven't been as available when family needs help." My stomach clenched, but I kept my voice even. "Really, I'm surprised to hear that. Can you give me an example? I'd hate to think I've been letting family down without realizing it." Grandma looked uncomfortable, but she continued. "Well, apparently there was an emergency a few months ago. Something with Harmony's car breaking down when she had the boys. And when they called you for help, you said you were too busy with a work project." I blinked, genuinely confused. "Grandma, I don't remember any call like that. Are you sure about the details? Because I would never ignore a call if Harmony and the boys were stranded somewhere." The doubt in my voice must have been convincing, because Grandma's expression softened slightly. "Oh dear, maybe I misunderstood the situation. You know how these family stories can get mixed up in the telling." But I could see that the seeds of doubt had been planted effectively. Over the course of our 2-hour lunch, I gently probed for more information, and the picture that emerged made me feel sick. For months, my family had been feeding Grandma Rose a steady stream of carefully crafted lies about my character and priorities. According to their version of events, I had refused to help with various family crises, all fabricated, shown off my success in ways that made Harmony feel bad about her struggles, completely false, and repeatedly demonstrated that I cared more about money and career advancement than family relationships, the exact opposite of the truth. The most devastating lie was about Christmas the previous year. They'd told Grandma that I'd given expensive gifts to show off my success while being insensitive to Harmony's financial struggles. In reality, I'd spent weeks picking out thoughtful, modest gifts that wouldn't make anyone uncomfortable, and I'd given the boys extra money in their cards specifically to help Harmony with expenses. But in their retelling, my generosity had become evidence of my materialism and lack of empathy. Every kind gesture had been twisted into selfishness, every achievement had been reframed as showing off, and every instance of independence had been characterized as family neglect. The worst part was seeing how effective their campaign had been. Grandma Rose, who had always seen me as the responsible, caring granddaughter, was now viewing me through the lens of their manipulation. She still loved me, but I could see the doubt in her eyes, the way she was re-evaluating our interactions through this new narrative they'd created. As we prepared to leave the cafe, Grandma took my hand across the table. "Celeste, dear, I hope you know how much I love you. But I do worry sometimes that success might be changing you. Just remember that family is more important than any job or possession, okay?" The irony was devastating. Here was my grandmother lecturing me about putting family first when my own family was systematically betraying me for money. But I squeezed her hand and smiled. "You're absolutely right, Grandma. Family should always come first." Driving home, I felt a cold clarity settling over me. My family's betrayal wasn't just about money, it was about destroying my relationship with the one person who had always believed in me. They were willing to poison my grandmother's love for me to steal not just my inheritance but my place in the family hierarchy. But they'd underestimated me. I wasn't the naive, accommodating daughter they thought they were manipulating. I was the granddaughter of Rose Mitchell, who had taught me that sometimes you have to fight for what's right even when it's family trying to take it away from you. That evening, I sat down with the notebook and my laptop and began my own investigation. If they wanted to play games with evidence and documentation, I could play that game too. But unlike them, I wouldn't need to lie or fabricate anything. The truth was on my side, and I was going to use it to expose their scheme completely. I started by going through my phone records, bank statements, and emails to document every interaction I'd had with family members over the past year. Every time I'd helped with babysitting, every dinner I'd paid for, every gift I'd given, every emergency I'd responded to. I created a detailed timeline with proof. Next, I reached out to Jake, Harmony's husband. He'd always seemed uncomfortable with the family dynamic, and I suspected he might not be fully on board with whatever scheme his wife and in-laws were running. I sent him a casual text suggesting we grab coffee soon to catch up. His response was immediate and enthusiastic, which told me he might be more of an ally than I'd expected. The final piece of my investigation was the most important. I needed to understand exactly how far their plan had progressed and what they were planning next. The notebook had mentioned Phase 2, which involved creating a crisis where I would refuse to help Harmony, providing the final proof Grandma Rose needed to change her will. I didn't have to wait long to find out what that crisis would be. Wednesday evening, 3 days after discovering the notebook, my phone rang. Harmony's name flashed on the screen and my pulse quickened. After everything I'd learned, hearing from her felt like receiving a call from an enemy pretending to be family. But I answered with my usual warmth, determined not to let on that I knew about their scheme. "Hey Celeste, how are you doing?" Her voice had that particular brightness that I now recognized as fake. the tone she used when she wanted something. "I'm good, just getting home from work." "What's up?" I kept my voice casual while my mind raced, wondering if this was the beginning of their phase 2. "Well, I have kind of a situation and I was hoping maybe you could help out." There it was. My stomach tightened as I prepared for whatever manufactured crisis they'd devised. Jake's mom had a fall yesterday and she's in the hospital in Phoenix. Jake flew out this morning to be with her, but I can't afford to take the boys out of daycare and fly down with him right now. The story sounded plausible, and for a moment I felt a pang of genuine sympathy. Then I remembered the notebook and realized this was likely the crisis they'd been planning. "Oh no, that's terrible. Is she going to be okay?" "The doctors think so, but she needs surgery on her hip, and Jake wants to stay with her for at least a week to help with recovery. The problem is our daycare just sent a notice that they're closing temporarily due to a COVID exposure, and I don't have anyone to watch the boys while I work." Harmony's voice took on that stressed, overwhelmed tone that usually made me immediately offer to help. But something felt off about the timing. Jake's mother's emergency combined with a daycare closure right when they needed to create a situation where I might refuse to help. It seemed suspiciously convenient. "That's a lot to deal with at once," I said carefully. "What kind of help do you need?" "Well, I was wondering if you might be able to take some time off work to watch Mason and Tyler for the week. I know it's a huge ask and I know how important your job is to you, but I'm really desperate. Here, I can't afford to miss a week of work and I don't have anyone else I trust with the boys." And there it was, the trap. They'd created a scenario where they could ask me to sacrifice my job responsibilities for family, knowing that I couldn't realistically take a full week off work with no notice. When I explained that I couldn't abandon my responsibilities, they'd frame it as choosing work over family, giving them the final evidence they needed for Grandma Rose. The brilliant part of their plan was that it wasn't completely unreasonable. A family emergency involving grandparents combined with unexpected childcare issues was the kind of crisis where family members might legitimately need to step up and help. If I'd received this call 6 months ago before discovering their betrayal, I would have been genuinely torn between wanting to help and needing to maintain my professional responsibilities. But now I could see the manipulation clearly. The timing was too perfect, the crisis too conveniently designed to put me in an impossible position. They'd crafted a scenario where any reasonable response I gave could be twisted into evidence of selfishness. Oh, Harmony, I wish I could, but this week is absolutely crazy at work. We have a major client presentation on Friday that I've been preparing for weeks and I'm leading the whole project. I literally can't miss it without potentially losing the account. This was actually true. I did have an important presentation, but I could see how they'd spin my response. "I understand that work is important, Celeste, but this is family. These are your nephews we're talking about." Her tone shifted slightly, becoming more pointed. "I mean, it's just 1 week and surely your boss would understand if you explained it was a family emergency. It's not that simple. This client represents a huge contract for the company, and if we lose them because I'm not there for the presentation, it could affect my entire career. Plus, I've already used most of my vacation days this year." I was being completely reasonable, but I could practically hear her mentally recording every word to use against me later. "Right. Of course. Your career." The disappointment in her voice was perfectly calculated. "I guess I'll have to figure something else out. Maybe I can find a babysitter I can afford, or maybe I'll just have to take unpaid leave and hope I don't lose my clients." The guilt trip was expertly applied, but instead of feeling guilty, I felt angry. This was my sister, someone who was supposed to love and support me, trying to manipulate me into sabotaging my own career for their scheme. The casual way she was willing to damage my professional reputation to serve their plan was breathtaking in its selfishness. "I'm really sorry, Harmony. If there was any way I could make it work, I would." Maybe mom and dad could help out. Or what about Jake's sister in Denver? I suggested alternatives, knowing they'd have reasons why none of them would work. Mom and dad both have doctor's appointments this week that they can't reschedule, and Jake's sister is dealing with her own kids' school issues. Of course they did. Every alternative had been conveniently eliminated, leaving only me as the solution. What about hiring a professional babysitter? I could help cover the cost if money's the issue. This was my test, a genuine offer to help that would solve their stated problem but wouldn't give them the narrative they wanted. There was a pause, and I could almost hear her brain working to figure out how to refuse my offer without making it obvious that she didn't actually want a solution. That's sweet of you to offer, but I don't really trust strangers with the boys. They're so young and they get anxious with new people. What about asking at their daycare? Even though it's closed, maybe one of their regular teachers would be willing to babysit privately. The boys already know and trust them. Another reasonable solution that would completely derail their plan. I hadn't thought of that. Harmony sounded genuinely surprised, as if the idea of actually solving the problem hadn't occurred to her. I guess I could ask around. I think that's a great idea. And seriously, if the cost is an issue, I'm happy to help financially. Family emergencies are what emergency funds are for, right? I was being genuinely helpful, while also making it clear that I recognize this as a family emergency worthy of financial sacrifice. The conversation continued for a few more minutes, with Harmony growing increasingly frustrated as I continued to offer practical solutions that didn't involve me sacrificing my career. By the time we hung up, it was clear that their carefully planned crisis hadn't gone as expected. But I knew this was just the beginning. They'd regroup and try again, probably with a more elaborate scenario that would be harder for me to solve with money or alternative arrangements. The notebook had mentioned multiple strategies for Phase 2, and I was sure they had backup plans. What they didn't know was that I'd been recording our conversation on my phone. Just like they'd been documenting evidence against me, I was now collecting evidence of their manipulation. Every lie, every guilt trip, every attempt to frame my reasonable responses as selfishness, it was all being preserved for when I was ready to expose their scheme. That night I called Jake's sister in Denver, using the excuse that I wanted to check on how Jake's mom was doing. What I discovered confirmed my suspicions. There was no hospital stay, no surgery, no emergency at all. Jake was home, Jake's mother was fine, and there had been no COVID exposure at the daycare. The entire crisis was fabricated, just as I'd suspected. They'd created a fake emergency specifically designed to put me in a position where I'd have to choose between family and career, then document my choice as evidence of my supposed selfishness. But their plan had a fatal flaw. They'd underestimated my intelligence and my determination to protect myself. They thought they were dealing with the same naive, accommodating Celeste, who had spent years putting their needs before her own. They had no idea they were now facing someone who knew exactly what they were doing and was prepared to fight back. The war was on, but they didn't even know the battle had started. Armed with proof of their deception, I spent the next week carefully planning my counterattack. The fabricated emergency call had been a gift, concrete evidence that they were willing to lie and manipulate to achieve their goals. But I needed more than just one recorded conversation to fully expose their scheme. I needed to document the entire pattern of their betrayal. My first move was to arrange a meeting with our family lawyer Patricia Chen, who had handled Grandma Rose's will and estate planning for years. Patricia had known our family since I was in high school, and she'd always been impressed by my maturity and responsibility. If anyone would be willing to listen to my concerns about potential inheritance manipulation, it would be her. "Celeste, it's wonderful to see you," Patricia said as I settled into the chair across from her desk. "Though I have to admit, I'm curious about why you wanted to meet. Is everything all right with your grandmother?" "Actually, that's exactly what I'm here to discuss." I have reason to believe that some family members may be attempting to manipulate Grandma Rose's decisions regarding her will, and I have evidence that I'd like you to review." Patricia's expression grew serious immediately. As an estate attorney, she'd seen plenty of family manipulation and inheritance disputes. "That's a very serious allegation, Celeste. What kind of evidence are you talking about?" I pulled out copies of the notebook, the recorded conversation with Harmony, and the documentation I'd compiled of all my actual interactions with family members over the past year. Patricia spent nearly an hour reviewing everything, her frown deepening as she read through the details of their scheme. "This is quite disturbing," she said finally. "If these accusations are accurate, we're looking at a clear case of inheritance fraud, attempting to manipulate a beneficiary through false information and fabricated evidence. The fact that they've documented their strategy so thoroughly actually works in your favor." "What can we do about it?" I asked. "Well, first I need to have a conversation with your grandmother. As her attorney, I have a duty to ensure that any changes to her will are made based on accurate information and her genuine wishes, not manipulation or coercion. Second, you need to decide how you want to handle this within your family. You could confront them directly, or we could handle this through legal channels." I thought about it for a moment. "I want to give them a chance to stop this on their own first. But I also want to make sure Grandma Rose knows the truth about what's been happening." Patricia nodded approvingly. "That's very mature of you. I'll arrange to meet with your grandmother this week to discuss her estate planning in general terms, and I'll gently probe to see if she's been influenced by any concerning information about family members. I won't mention your visit specifically unless she brings up changes she wants to make." 2 days later, Patricia called with an update that made my blood boil. "Celeste, I met with your grandmother yesterday and I'm afraid the situation is worse than we thought. She's already contacted me about making significant changes to her will. She wants to remove you as the primary beneficiary and transfer most of your inheritance to Harmony." My hands tightened on the phone. "Did she say why?" "She mentioned concerns about your priorities and character that clearly came from the campaign your family has been running. She also said there had been recent incidents that confirmed her worries about your selfishness and lack of family commitment. I believe she was referring to the fabricated emergency call you recorded." The audacity was staggering. They'd created a fake crisis, manipulated my response, and were now using it as evidence to steal my inheritance. But Patricia had more news. "However, I told your grandmother that any major changes to her will should be carefully considered, and I suggested she might want to discuss her concerns directly with you before making final decisions. She agreed to think about it for a few more weeks before proceeding. That bought me time, but not much. I needed to act quickly to expose their scheme before they convinced Grandma Rose to make irreversible changes to her will. My next step was to confront Jake privately. Of all the conspirators, he seemed the most uncomfortable with the deception, and I hoped I could convince him to come clean about their plan. I invited him for coffee on Saturday morning, ostensibly to catch up while Harmony was at her yoga class. Jake arrived looking nervous, which told me he suspected this wasn't just a casual family coffee date. He was a decent guy who'd gotten swept up in his wife's scheme, and I could see the guilt written all over his face. "Jake, I'm going to cut right to the chase," I said after we'd ordered our drinks. "I know about the notebook. I know about the plan to manipulate Grandma Rose's will. And I know that the emergency call about your mother was completely fabricated." His face went white and his coffee cup rattled slightly as he set it down. "Celeste, first. I don't know what you're talking about. Please don't lie to me. I have proof of everything." The notebook with their plan written out in detail, the recorded conversation where Harmony lied about your mother's emergency, even documentation that your mother was never in the hospital. "This isn't speculation, Jake. I know exactly what they've been doing." He was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee as if it might provide answers. Finally, he looked up with genuine distress in his eyes. I never wanted any part of this, Celeste. You have to believe me. This was all Harmony and your parents' idea. Then why didn't you stop it or at least warn me? Because... He paused, struggling with his words. Because we really are struggling financially, and Harmony convinced me that your grandmother's money would be wasted on you since you're already successful. She said you didn't really need it, and we could use it to give the boys a better life. The honesty was refreshing even though the logic was infuriating. So you thought it was okay to steal money that was promised to me because you decided I didn't deserve it. When you put it like that, it sounds horrible. But Harmony made it seem like we were just helping your grandmother see the truth about priorities and family values. She said we weren't really stealing anything, just making sure the money went to someone who would use it for family instead of selfish purposes. I could see how Harmony had manipulated Jake just like she'd been manipulating everyone else. She'd convinced him that their theft was actually a noble act of family resource reallocation. Jake, do you understand that what you've all been doing is illegal? Inheritance fraud is a serious crime and you could all face criminal charges. The color drained completely from his face. Criminal charges? But we haven't actually taken any money yet. Conspiracy to commit fraud is still a crime even if the fraud isn't completed. And you've already damaged my relationship with my grandmother based on lies and manipulation. That's elder abuse, which carries its own legal consequences. Jake looked like he might be sick. What? What do you want me to do? I want you to help me expose the truth to Grandma Rose. I want you to admit to your part in this scheme, and help me prove that all the stories they've been telling her are lies. And I want you to convince Harmony and my parents to stop this before it goes any further. And if I don't, then I take all my evidence to the police and let them handle it. You'll probably all face criminal charges and the scandal will destroy your family's reputation permanently. Is that really what you want? For Mason and Tyler, Jake was quiet for several minutes, clearly wrestling with the decision. Finally, he nodded slowly.
You're right.
This has gone way too far and I should have stopped it months ago. What do you need me to do? For the first time since discovering the notebook, I felt a surge of hope. With Jake's cooperation, I could expose their scheme completely and restore my relationship with Grandma Rose before irreversible damage was done. But I also knew that Harmony and my parents wouldn't go down without a fight. When they realized their plan had been discovered, and their co-conspirator had turned against them, they'd likely escalate their efforts or try to discredit me in new ways. The final battle was about to begin and I intended to win it decisively. The confrontation happened the following Sunday at what was supposed to be a routine family dinner at my parents' house. I'd spent the week gathering final pieces of evidence and coordinating with Jake, who had agreed to back up my account of their scheme. Patricia had also agreed to attend as a witness, ostensibly to discuss Grandma Rose's estate planning with the whole family. I arrived at my parents' house with a folder full of documentation and a recording device in my purse. Harmony and Jake were already there with the twins and the scene looked deceptively normal. Just another family gathering around Mom's dining room table. But I could see the tension in Jake's shoulders, and the way Harmony kept glancing at him nervously. "Celeste, honey, you look tired," Mom said, giving me her usual kiss on the cheek. "Are you working too hard again?" You know how important it is to maintain work-life balance? The irony of her concern for my well-being while actively sabotaging my life wasn't lost on me. "Actually, Mom, I've been dealing with some family issues that have been pretty stressful." Dad looked up from where he was playing with the twins. "Family issues, is everything all right?" "Well, that's actually what I wanted to talk to everyone about today. I've discovered some information that I think we all need to discuss openly." I pulled out the notebook and placed it on the table. "Does anyone recognize this?" Harmony's face went completely white, and she immediately looked at Jake with panic in her eyes. Mom and Dad exchanged confused glances, clearly not understanding the significance of the notebook yet. That's my notebook," Harmony stammered. "Where did you find it?" "In my glove compartment where you accidentally left it after borrowing my car," along with a receipt from an auto body shop for damage estimates, which was interesting since no one mentioned that my car had been damaged. The room fell silent except for the twins' chatter as they played with their toys, oblivious to the drama unfolding around them. Mom was the first to speak. "Celeste, what are you talking about?" "What notebook?" I opened to the first page and read aloud. "Operation Get Celeste's Inheritance Early. Phase 1 complete." The reaction was immediate and telling. Dad's mouth fell open, Mom gasped audibly, and Harmony looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. "This notebook contains a detailed plan to manipulate Grandma Rose into changing her will by feeding her fabricated stories about my character and priorities. It documents months of lies you've been telling her, fake emergencies you've created to make me look selfish, and strategies for stealing my inheritance." "Now wait just a minute," Dad started, but I held up my hand. "I'm not finished. I also have a recording of Harmony calling me with a completely fabricated emergency about Jake's mother being in the hospital. An emergency that never happened, designed specifically to create evidence of my supposed selfishness when I couldn't drop everything to help." I played the recording and everyone listened in stunned silence as Harmony's voice filled the room, spinning an elaborate lie about Jake's mother's fall and surgery. When it finished, I looked directly at my parents. "And I've confirmed with Jake's sister that none of it was true. Jake's mother was never in the hospital. There was no fall, no surgery, no emergency at all. It was completely fabricated to manipulate me into a position where any reasonable response could be twisted into evidence against me." Mom looked absolutely horrified. "Harmony, please tell me this isn't true." But before Harmony could answer, Jake spoke up. "It's all true. I'm sorry, but Celeste is right about everything. We've been lying to Grandma Rose for months, trying to convince her that Celeste doesn't deserve her inheritance. And the emergency call was fake. My mother is fine and was never in any hospital." The betrayal on my parents' faces was painful to watch, but I pressed on. "The worst part is that you've been systematically poisoning my relationship with the one family member who always believed in me. Grandma Rose has already contacted her lawyer about changing her will based on your lies." "Oh my God," Mom whispered, sinking into her chair. "Celeste, we never. I didn't know about any notebook or plan. I just thought." "You thought what, Mom? That it was okay to tell Grandma lies about me as long as you believed they served some greater purpose?" Dad cleared his throat, looking ashamed. "We may have emphasized certain behaviors or attitudes that concerned us about your priorities, but we never intended to manipulate anyone's inheritance decisions."
"Really? Then explain this."
I pulled out copies of the text messages I'd found on Harmony's phone, which Jake had provided as evidence of their coordination. The messages clearly showed Mom and Dad discussing specific stories to tell Grandma Rose, and celebrating when she seemed to believe their fabrications. The evidence was overwhelming, and there was no way for them to deny their participation in the scheme. But I wasn't finished yet. "Patricia Chen is here today as Grandma Rose's attorney and as a witness to this conversation. Patricia, can you tell everyone what Grandma Rose has asked you to do regarding her will?"
Patricia, who had been listening in professional silence, spoke clearly. "Mrs.
Rose contacted my office to arrange changes to her will that would remove Celeste as the primary beneficiary and transfer the majority of her inheritance to Harmony. She cited concerns about Celeste's character and family commitment that appear to have been based on fabricated information." The room erupted in chaos. Harmony burst into tears, Mom started frantically apologizing, and Dad demanded to know what legal consequences they might be facing. Through it all, the twins continued playing happily, unaware that their mother's greed had just destroyed the family. But I held up my hand for silence. Here's what's going to happen. First, all three of you are going to accompany me to Grandma Rose's house, where you're going to confess everything you've done and apologize for lying to her. Second, you're going to provide written statements detailing your participation in this scheme, which Patricia will keep on file in case Grandma ever questions the truth again. And if we refuse, Harmony asked through her tears, then Patricia files a complaint with the police for inheritance fraud and elder abuse, and you all deal with the criminal consequences. Your choice. The confession session at Grandma Rose's house was one of the most difficult things I've ever witnessed. Watching my parents and sister admit to months of calculated lies and manipulation was heartbreaking, but seeing the hurt and betrayal on Grandma's face was worse. She aged 10 years in the span of our conversation, and I could see her struggling to understand how her own family could deceive her so completely. But Grandma Rose was tough, and once she understood the full scope of their betrayal, her response was swift and decisive. I am deeply disappointed in all of you, she said with the kind of quiet authority that made us all feel like scolded children. Celeste, I owe you an enormous apology. I allowed myself to be manipulated into doubting your character, and I'm ashamed of how easily I believed their lies. She turned to my parents and Harmony with steel in her voice. As for the three of you, you have damaged this family in ways that will take years to repair. You have betrayed my trust, attempted to steal from your own family member, and shown a level of greed and deception that I never thought possible from people I raised and loved. The immediate consequences were severe. Grandma Rose not only refused to change her will, but she added specific provisions protecting my inheritance from any future manipulation attempts. My parents were banned from her house for 6 months, and Harmony lost all babysitting privileges with the twins until further notice. But the long-term consequences were even more significant. The family dynamic was permanently altered. Trust once broken so completely couldn't be easily rebuilt. Family gatherings became awkward affairs where everyone walked on eggshells, and the easy intimacy we'd once shared was replaced by careful politeness. Harmony and Jake's marriage suffered tremendously under the stress of their financial problems and the shame of their failed scheme. Jake, who had never been fully committed to the plan, became increasingly resentful of how his wife had manipulated him into participating in fraud. They separated 6 months later, and Jake moved back to Phoenix with the twins. My parents, faced with the reality of what they'd done, entered family therapy and spent months trying to understand how their favoritism had led them to participate in such an elaborate betrayal. Mom in particular was devastated by the realization that her golden child wasn't the person she'd thought, and that her responsible older daughter had been the target of such calculated deception. As for me, the victory felt hollow at first. I'd won the war and preserved my inheritance, but I'd lost the family I'd always hoped might someday see me as worthy of their love and respect. The naive part of me that had kept hoping for their approval finally died during those confrontations, replaced by a harder wisdom about the nature of family loyalty and the reality of human greed. But in the months that followed, something unexpected happened. With the toxic dynamic finally exposed and dismantled, real relationships became possible for the first time. My parents, forced to confront their favoritism and its consequences, began reaching out to me as an individual rather than as the convenient, reliable daughter they'd always taken for granted. Dad and I started having monthly lunches where we talked about my work, my goals, and my life, not just family obligations or Harmony's problems. Mom began calling just to check on me, not because she needed something but because she was genuinely interested in my well-being. Most surprisingly, Grandma Rose and I grew closer than we'd ever been. The shared experience of betrayal and recovery created a bond between us that was deeper than our previous relationship.
She became not just a loving grandmother but a trusted advisor and friend who understood the complexities of family loyalty and the importance of protecting yourself from those who would exploit your love.
1 year later, as I sat in my pristine car, the scratches long since repaired, driving to another family gathering, I reflected on how dramatically everything had changed. The family that had once taken me for granted now appreciated my presence. The inheritance that had nearly been stolen was more secure than ever. And most importantly, I'd learned to value myself enough to fight for what was rightfully mine, even when the enemies were my own family. The karma that came from my family wasn't the dramatic instant justice you see in movies. It was the slow, inevitable consequence of their choices: broken relationships, lost trust, and the painful realization that their greed had cost them far more than any inheritance could ever be worth. But sometimes real justice isn't about punishment. Sometimes it's about truth finally coming to light, allowing healing to begin and real relationships to flourish in place of the toxic patterns that had defined us for so long. Have you ever had to fight your own family for what was rightfully yours? Or maybe you've been in a situation where you discovered people you trusted were working against you behind your scenes. I'd love to hear your stories in the POPD comments below. Sometimes sharing these experiences helps us all feel less alone in dealing with family betrayal and manipulation. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life family drama stories. And don't forget to share this with anyone who might need to hear that it's okay to stand up for yourself even when family is the one trying to tear you down. Thank you for watching, and remember, blood may make you related, but loyalty and respect make you family. Sometimes the people who deserve your trust the most are the ones who've earned it through their actions, not their genetics. Until next time, keep standing up for yourselves and never let anyone, family or otherwise, steal your worth or your future.